The 1984 Padre Ball Club is a microcosm of what life is really all about.
Sure, you know, everybody had different beliefs and philosophies.
We had members of the John Birch Society.
Drugs.
Punches being thrown.
The players would get on each other.
There'd be arguments in the clubhouse every day.
That's the way it was. But we were a team that knew that we wanted to win.
Every team has its own fabric to it. Every team has its own destiny to play out. That team, through its clawing and fighting and arguing, they were able to put it all aside and win a pennant, which was the first here in San Diego.
The Padres have the National League pennant. Oh, Doctor, you can hang a star on that, baby.
The one common thread among all of us was a respect for the fans. We taught them what a winner looks like, how it acts. 25 years later, we feel the same.
Sentiment shared by the San Diego fans who welcomed back members of the '84 team for a special reunion at Petco Park.
Hey, Terry, nice to see you. How you been, huh?
Hey, it still fits, same size.
Hey, see, his is a little tight. See, you know.
It's always because of the guns.
He started lifting.
TK, little help, please.
We've changed, we've got gray hair, we've gained some weight, but when you look in the eyes, everything's the same.
Here, let's go get a bat right now.
Yeah, let's see what you can do about that, huh?
The reunion offered a rare chance for these former teammates to once again enjoy each other's company. Not everyone could make it. Among them, Hall of Famers Goose Gossage, manager Dick Williams, and Tony Gwynn, who was coaching at San Diego State.
A lot of quality guys in that clubhouse, and wished I could have been here at the reunion because you very rarely get the chance to tell those guys thank you.
But while Tony couldn't say it at the reunion, he did honor his teammates at the Hall of Fame in 2007.
1984, I was the fortunate one because my locker was right in the middle of Garv, of Terry Kennedy, Tim Flannery, Bruce Bochy, and Greg Nettles. And they welcomed me in. Come on, kid, have a seat.
Gwynn, who spent 20 years in a Padres uniform, embodies the triumphant spirit of that 1984 team. But there is also another side to this story. For two other members of the team were conspicuous by their absence. Tragic figures whose talent was trumped by torment. Like starting pitcher Eric Shao.
Eric Shao was a dear friend, one of my closest friends, and he brought struggles from his past into a new life as a Christian.
Also missing was Alan Wiggins, a speed demon on the field, haunted by demons off it.
Alan Wiggins was one of those accidents that you see happening, and there just did not seem to be any way to recover him.
And for some Padres, triumph and tragedy has played an equal role in their fate.
I think triumph is really born out of tragedy. And that is what I take away from 1984 and the good, the bad, and the ugly that came with that.
This is way too cool.
The good was certainly their connection with the fans.
What position do you like?
First base and pitcher.
Ah, first base. All right.
You know, for us old guys, it's fun when people come out and they, even if they don't remember, they want an autograph.
That was the greatest. You know, such a good group, and all the reminiscings we did today was great. Well, thank you.
You gave us a good time back then.
Yes, we did.
You see, although Padres fans were always loyal, they were not always treated to winning baseball. The team had struggled since its birth in 1969, and owner Ray Kroc, the visionary behind McDonald's, decided to change the menu by putting his own Big Mac into the front office.
When I took over in '81, Ray Kroc said to me, "What was your goal?" I said, "My goal is to get an average to above average player at every position."
And so McKeon began to clean house and solve this puzzle from scratch. His roster moves earned him a reputation for shrewdness and a classic baseball nickname.
Trader Jack.
Trader Jack. Trader Jack did great things, and he made, I thought, the initial big move in that deal with St. Louis, and it just coalesced. It came together.
Part of the deal was obtaining Cardinals catcher Terry Kennedy, who would become the team's anchor in 1981. He also dealt Gold Glove shortstop Ozzie Smith to St. Louis in search of more offense.
Gary Templeton really had a big impact on the 84 team. You got to remember that he replaced one of the most lovable ball players in San Diego history, Ozzie Smith. And people still will talk about Smith before they talk about Tempe, and yet Tempe was equally as good with a better bat.
In addition to his myriad deals, Trader Jack also drafted wisely, bringing names like Gwynn, Wiggins, and Kevin McReynolds into the system. But what really helped this team build upon its two previous 500 seasons was Croc's willingness to pay for free agents, one already a Southern California hero.
I had been in LA for 15 years. I never anticipated being anywhere else, and I got an offer I could refuse, and all of a sudden I'm on the market. And I remember meeting with Ray Kroc in his office, gorgeous home up in the cliff, looking up and down the coast. And he said, Steve, he said, I think you can make a difference here.
Little by little, we started to put the pieces together, and in the fall of '83, I talked to the organization about the possibility of signing Goose Gossage. I thought he could help us win the pennant, and Ray said, go do it.
But tragically, Kroc would never get to see this team in action, for in January of 1984, he died of heart disease. The team dedicated the season to their former owner, what would become the most memorable season in San Diego Padres history.
I feel it's just one of those things where you don't have to say much. It's kind of lead by example and just go out and do your job like a professional, and the kids are going to follow.
When we looked at our ball club in '83, we needed that closer. And it looked like he was going to sign with us. And then all of a sudden, you know, we started talking about economics and didn't think we could afford it. And Ray Kroc was in the hospital. Ballard Smith was the president of the club. And Ballard said, let's go over and see Ray. So we went over to see Ray. And Ray said, how are we coming along with Gossage? And I remember Ballard Smith saying, well, Ray, I don't know whether we can afford it. And he said, what do you think, Jack? I said, if we get him, we win the pennant. And Ray says, Ballard, sign him. And basically, that's how we got Goose Gossage.
I came over here to help win a pennant. I'm not going to win it all by myself. It's going to take 25 guys over 162 games.
You know, in spring training, he talked about winning championships. I don't know for the other young guys, but for me, it was kind of hard to comprehend what all it was going to take to win championships.
At number 54, Rich Gossage.
Goose was signed with Croc's blessing 1 week before Ray passed away. The Padres also traded for Greg Nettles, another former member of the Bronx Zoo. Trader Jack had added some championship swagger.
You know, when you looked at all the pieces of the puzzle that were being put together by Jack McKeon, and then all of a sudden this guy comes on board who is the premier closer in all of baseball. He was a critical component to the success of 1984 with us.
Goose was the kind of a pitcher, if you were a right-hand batter, he's the last man on this earth you'd want to face.
Pitching for the Padres, number 54, Rich Gossage.
Goose was a menacing presence on the mound and a powerful one in the clubhouse. The stories are timeless.
Him and I were both working out on life cycles right next to each other.
The first day of camp, we're shagging the outfield.
And he started on me, and I started on him. He started on me, I started on him.
Just got traded over. Goose is brand new, just signed as a free agent.
Next thing you know, we are on the floor, off the bikes, fighting.
We're talking in center field, and he says, so where are you staying? I said, well, I'm in the hotel. He said, no, you're not. You're coming with me.
And then in the 9th inning, I'm about to pinch hit, and I'm walking out to come out to hit at Qualcomm, and he had run all the way from the bullpen. Vlad, go get him, go get him.
And after the game, he took me out to his condo, and I spent the whole spring living with him. And that's how he was.
But even Gossage met his match when he came up against the Padres' old-fashioned, hard-as-nails manager, Dick Williams.
Dick Williams, let me tell you about Dick Williams. He was a tough manager, and I don't know if he could manage today the way players are, because they make a lot more money than the manager. But Dick was a tough guy.
He managed by intimidation.
Come on, Garv, hit one.
He was the field general, and I think he ran it like a general. He had high expectations.
And he did things differently, and they were done his way. with no questions asked, and that's the way it was. It was Dick's way or the highway.
Debatable thing, isn't it?
In fact, one of the classic things, I don't know if people remember this, but Eric Shaw was having trouble getting the ball over the plate. Dick said, "You walk a man, you're out of there." He did, and he was out of there. Now, how many managers would do that to a player? They want to keep him happy.
You've done it. You've done a great job here. I was very strict. If I told a fellow one time on something and he did it again, then he was in my doghouse. This is the way I operated, and I'd rub some people the wrong way.
You know, Dick used to wear his glasses on the end of his nose, and he'd sit all the way at the end of a bench. And if you made a mistake, you didn't want to go that way. But when you got to the opposite end and you sit in and you kind of glance to see if he's looking, he'd be looking just like. So sooner or later, you were going to hear about it.
In spring training of '84, he basically told Tim Flannery that there was no way he could ever play on a team that Williams managed.
He goes, "You're the worst player I've ever had. Right now, while I'm talking to you, I'm looking for another second baseman." He goes, "Oh, you're in there tonight, but don't screw up."
This is a guy I want you to get, the only guy you're facing. Come on after him.
He put a lot of pressure on me, you know. He wanted me to prove myself. For me, that was a style that I liked, and it motivated me, and it helped me.
I loved it because he told it to my face. A lot of guys didn't know. They hated him. They hated his guts. Now guys go, "Man, you know, I never realized Dick was teaching me how to win."
And Williams knew how to win, having authored 2 World Series titles in Oakland and a pennant in Boston.
Dick wasn't a pat on the back kind of guy, but the end justifies the means. He was able to take teams to championships.
Dick Williams, to me, is the greatest manager that I ever played for.
In March of 1984, Alan Wiggins and I on the way home from spring training. And, you know, it's about a 4-hour drive. You know, not much conversation for the first couple of hours. And about halfway, Alan Wiggins says to me, "Wouldn't it be great if we got to the World Series?"
And rather than just talk about it, both Gwynn and Wiggins went to work, emerging as the spark plugs that ignited the Padres, helping the team go 10-2 right out of the gate.
Well, offensively, you know, Wiggins and Gwynn had an unbelievable season. Gwynn won his first batting title that year.
Tony Gwynn just continues to amaze.
And the table was always set by Wiggins.
Alan Wiggins might have been the best baseman this club ever had.
And this guy, if he got on base, you know, it was 1-0.
The pivotal point of the whole season happened in a game against the Expos, and the Padres were on a losing streak. Wiggins stole 5 bases in the game, tying then what was the National League record. The Padres won the game, snapped the losing streak, and they really never looked back after that.
He stole 70 bases, and I was the beneficiary, hitting behind him, got a lot of fastballs.
Gwynn had over 200 hits, so he was always moving them over. There was always a tremendous amount of electricity between those two guys.
And they did this while changing roles in the field, with Gwynn becoming a full-time right fielder. Wiggins, an excellent outfielder, was asked to make a much more radical change.
We had a lot of confidence in Alan Wiggins because we did know that he was a former infielder. And we also figured that if he could do the job, then we would be a much better ball club because we'd be able to use Martinez in the outfield, which supply more power.
So Dick went to Alan and said, "Hey, can you play second base?" Alan said, "I can play anywhere." And so we gave him a second base glove, and he went out there and he started catching the ball. The biggest thing Alan had to overcome was situations.
I almost was babysat during spring training. I took a lot of ground balls, and all the coaching staff, everybody worked with me. They were really patient.
We ran a lot of cutoffs and relays. We ran a lot of extra fundamental drills. And after about a month into the season, he had it down.
But while there were similarities to Gwynn and Wiggins' game on the field, they could not have been more different off it. Tony's work ethic kept him constantly focused on baseball, even when he was out of uniform.
He was a committed baseball player to the game itself, to his craft. He was the first guy that brought in the video and actually knew what he was looking at.
Wiggins, meanwhile, liked to talk about everything and everywhere.
Alan Wiggins was intellectual. I mean, he was smart. And Eric Shaw was smart, and they would argue back and forth. And I used to ask them both, "Why do you guys do this every day? Every day, you guys come in and you guys, it's like a debate class. You guys got to debate every single subject." And they both said that's part of the fun. That's what they did.
But the biggest difference between Tony and Alan had to do with the trajectory of their careers. From the very start, Gwynn seemed destined for greatness. The only question was, what sport?
I broadcast San Diego State basketball and saw Tony as a skinny little kid with an afro, one of the best point guards on the West Coast. And he was drafted by the Clippers, who were then in San Diego, and decided to play baseball, thank God.
Drafted by the Padres in '81, Gwynn became a full-time starter in '84, finishing the year with a .351 batting average and the first of 8 National League batting titles. And he was elected to his first of 15 All-Star games.
You guys vote for me? Yeah!
Gwynn was, is, and always will be the shining star of the San Diego franchise. But the tale of Alan Wiggins is one of potential unfulfilled. The leadoff man in '84, he had 154 hits and scored 106 runs, second best in the league. He also stole 70 bases that season to set a team record. Wiggins' star burned bright, but it would burn out just as quickly. For 1 year later, in April of '85, during a series back in his hometown, Alan went AWOL.
Well, we're getting ready to play a very important series up in L.A., and he doesn't show.
Nobody had heard from him. Nobody knew where he was.
You immediately thought the worst.
And honestly, I think there's only a few of us in the clubhouse who were really concerned.
The night and the next few days just became the pursuit of what happened to Alan Wiggins.
It turns out that Alan had struggled with drugs since his early minor league days. His addiction climaxed when he got to L.A., blowing off his team for 10 full days.
When, he didn't show up and we found out that he was on drugs, why Mrs. Kroc insisted we'd move him.
It was kind of a steadfast position that Joan took. She had her own demons with her husband, Ray, who was a very heavy drinker, and she was just not going to have people on her team doing that kind of stuff.
Wiggins was traded to Baltimore, and by the end of '87, he was gone from the game for good.
Well, gentlemen, we've run into a little bit of a dilemma here through the course of the season, and what we've decided to do is make some changes.
And in this case, change really did mean different, for the 1984 Padres truly were unique.
We had quite a blend of characters on that ball club.
We had a group of guys that were veterans, that had been through it before, that had won. Then the other half of the team were all young. And the older players, experienced players, they really took us under their wings and they taught us how to win.
Veterans like Gossage, Nettles, and Garvey were providing stability in a clubhouse that oftentimes was more like a frat house.
I actually had to step over a fight of Kurt Bavacqua and Alan Wiggins fist fighting over a game of pluck. And I just got to the point I didn't even think about it. It happened all the time. But that's the way the game works when you're together every day as a family.
This particular family was a cast of characters who loved to laugh, quite often at someone's expense, like the infamous pool episode.
It started with Bruce Bochy, basically, because Boch is from Florida, and he always talks about fighting alligators, And what he does is he takes you down and starts rolling you and holds you underwater. He calls it the alligator roll, and he thinks that's fun.
And that's when Eddie Whitson came into the picture, a newly coiffed Ed Whitson, that is.
Ed Whitson, I can talk about it because I've got no hair, but Eddie was bald, and he got a big old curly rug and showed up to spring training with a full head of hair, and if you said anything about it, he'd fight you.
So the wrestler and the fighter were both lounging by a hotel pool during an off day when Bochy decided to take Whitson on one of his alligator swims.
Boch hooked him around and took him down. Started rolling him. And when Whit came up, it was like, oh, and his hair flipped all the way back off. And Boch says, hey, I know you. You're Eddie Whitson. And I'm telling you what, he wanted to fight. I started laughing so hard I had to leave because he was going to beat me up if he saw me laughing. But this kind of team we had.
And no one was exempt from the ribbing. In fact, there was one veteran who became a prime target simply because he was so perfect.
We were kind of a free-spirited bunch of guys out there in San Diego, and then we had Mr. Clean, Steve Garvey. And, you know, in the clubhouse, I would bust his chops.
Goose and I understood that you needed a light clubhouse, so we did this little routine where I got on him for not wearing a tie, and he got on me for never having hair out of place.
Every time that we would be on the road, he would always go in the bathroom and straighten everything up about 20 minutes before we were going to land. And I'd yank his shirt out, I'd twirl his, you know, spin his tie around, unbutton his shirt. And the first time I did it, he let me go through the whole thing, and he goes, "Are you through?" And everybody just cracked up.
The Goose and Garvey show was so popular it eventually got top billing.
We did a cover on a sport magazine. It was Mr. Clean and Mr. Mean. We just had a lot of fun.
But even a clubhouse full of characters needs someone at the head of the class. And on the '84 Padres, that someone was pinch-hitting specialist Kurt Bevacqua.
You're about as funny off the field as you are on. Don't let the door hit you in the rear when you leave.
I didn't know you could hear you, Skip. But I do the hitting, not the door.
I used to call Kurt a clown. And I mean, he'd have the clubhouse just laughing.
Bevacqua used to show up in limousines everywhere back before anybody was making money. Nobody could afford a limousine, but he somehow had one.
One time, that limo took Bevacqua and teammate Terry Kennedy to downtown San Diego, where they decided to play catch off the top of a rather large building.
Kurt, we know you're a little crazy, but nobody knew you were this crazy.
Damn, that's high. I would never attempt this. I wouldn't be on this end. I'm glad I'm on the other end.
Hey, if he can get the ball around here, he's going to be lucky.
Are you ready?
Yeah, go ahead.
Here they come. It's true. You must be ahead.
Here it comes. There goes Kurt Bevacqua under it and hit.
For all the fun Kurt had off the field, he was quite the pinch hitter on it.
Yeah, get yourself a bat.
At least he was when you could track him down.
He was a pinch hitter who you couldn't even find until the 8th inning. He'd be up in the clubhouse, and then the 9th inning, he'd come walking down the bench. He'd say, "Secret weapons here." That's how Bevacqua was.
By the time I went to the plate, I was pretty sure, and I pretty much knew what kind of pitch I was going to get, and that's what made me successful.
Fly ball, deep left field, way back, grand slam homer.
Bevacqua's antics never got in the way of his performance on the field, and that, in a nutshell, describes the '84 Padres. For beyond the laughter, the pranks, and the occasional fight, when it was time to take the field, they did so as a fully focused team, taking over first place on June 9th and never looking back.
We had a whole bunch of characters, but when we put that Padre uniform on, we're playing for the same team.
The 1984 Padres were made up of a kaleidoscope of personalities, but it was the ace of the team's pitching staff who, in many ways, proved to be the most colorful.
He was one of the more unusual ball players I've ever met.
We all got to know Eric as someone who was really a genius.
Anytime a player's reading philosopher on the plane, you know, he kind of stands out.
He loved to talk about different things. He didn't talk much about baseball to me.
If you want to talk about astrology, Eric could talk about astrology. Classicals, operas, any of those subjects. Outstanding, intellectual guy.
Shaw was just as sharp on the mound, but his pitching prowess was just a small part of his repertoire.
He played baseball more for the fact that he was good at it, and it wasn't really his love. Music was his love.
A lot of times I used to go to jazz bars and Eric would be sitting up, he would show up and sit down and play his guitar.
We would be mesmerized. He'd play on the plane on our trips. He'd play in the clubhouse.
As strong as Eric was intellectually, as strong as he was in relationship to music and baseball and those gifts and talents, I think there was a sense of deep insecurity in relationship to just who he was as a man. He could never be satisfied because he was driven to perfection.
Shaw also had a penchant for stirring up controversy, like in 1985 when he gave up the record-breaking hit to Pete Rose.
There it
the nation saluted the new all-time career hits leader, Shaw took a seat on the mound, a gesture that many found to be disrespectful to both Rose and the game. Prior to that, Shaw also attracted public scrutiny when in July of '84 he was lambasted in the press after he and mound mates Dave Dravecky and Mark Thurmond went front and center with their ties to the controversial John Birch Society.
They made this appearance at the Del Mar Fair, the San Diego County Fair, and they had the John Birch booth. And all of a sudden people are walking by and they see, that's Dave Dravecky, that's Eric Shaw. And that's why it became a huge story.
I don't think they knew what a radical group the John Birch Society really was.
It was an organization that I thought represented less government, more responsibility by the people, and with God's help, a better world.
I don't think that communism, socialism, whatever you want to call it, is a very good thing, and felt like that was an organization that fought those type things.
In the 50s and 60s, the Birch Society, regardless of what its tenets were, they were basically considered to be a more sophisticated Ku Klux Klan without the hoods.
When the article came out that I was racist and anti-Semitic, I was shocked.
We knew that there wasn't no racist guys. We all did things together, and they showed no signs of that before all of this stuff came about.
Our teammates were able with us to work through the implications of those perceptions, and it did not play a factor in destroying the good that was going on with the San Diego Padres in 1984.
Dravecky was a big part of the Padres' success that season.
Got him looking.
And while his career plateaued in the ensuing seasons, it reached a turning point after he was traded to the San Francisco Giants. A deeply religious man, Dave's faith would soon be tested when crisis threatened not only his career, but his life.
'88, I'm being diagnosed with cancer in my left arm. And it culminated with me having surgery that year to remove this mass, along with 50% of my deltoid muscle, and the doctors telling me outside of a miracle, I would never pitch again.
But Dave drew upon his faith and refused to turn his back on the life he so loved.
I could not walk away from the game and wonder for the rest of my life, could I have made a comeback?
And in August of '89, Dravecky returned to the mound once again in San Francisco, an inspirational sight for baseball fans and non-fans alike. The cheers that day were deafening, and Dravecky had some extra support, for he'd be throwing to his former Padres battery mate, Terry Kennedy.
I was more nervous in that game than I ever was in any game I ever played, because I wanted him to succeed. I wanted it to work.
And that day, we defeated the Reds 4-3, and I went on to a victory, throwing 93 pitches over the course of 8 innings, and I'm back in the saddle.
After one successful outing on the mound, Dave had become a source of strength for countless cancer victims. But in his next start 5 days later in Montreal, Dravecky's comeback took a tragic turn.
When I threw that pitch and my arm broke, all I could hear at that point in time were Will Clark's words, "Breathe, Dave, breathe."
I didn't know if it was a break or whether it was tendons or something, but he was hurt badly.
They've got him on a stretcher. All of us, the whole team, we're gathered around him, and we're crying. We just can't believe what has happened. And even in that time, he was ministering to all of us. Don't worry about me. I'm fine. I'm okay. You guys just keep on going.
He says at that moment, he knew there was a bigger reason for him in life.
All thoughts of another comeback were extinguished when it was revealed that the cancer had returned to Dave's pitching arm. He worked hard to recover, but a series of life-threatening setbacks forced Dravecky to agree that his only recourse was to lose the arm.
And after the amputation, that's when a lot of the deep struggles began, because I was now faced with an identity crisis. If I can no longer pitch, then who is Dave Dravecky? What am I going to do with my life?
Although the '84 Padres often fought with each other, on the field they were united as one, especially when challenged.
The Braves were about 10 games out at that point and on life support.
We had just beaten Atlanta a couple ball games. They're in second place. We're in first place. The very first pitch of the game, Perez hit Alan Wiggins in the back with a fastball.
Perez hits Wiggins with the first pitch.
We knew what they were doing.
Once they hit Alan Wiggins, we believed they were trying to intimidate us, and we weren't going away.
We don't do a thing until Perez comes up to the plate, and we tried to hit him.
Oh, that ball is right at him. That was right at him.
First pitch is right behind his head by Eddie Whitson, and he got up with his bat in his hand.
We got problems here. We got problems here. Pasquale won't put the bat down.
John McSherry, the home plate umpire, calls both managers together and says the next pitcher that throws at anybody gets thrown out of the game, and the manager gets ejected.
And I just remember Dick saying, I don't care what happens in this game, win or lose, but we're going to take care of business. That game meant nothing at that point.
Dick comes back to the dugout. He gets our bullpen up. Whitson misses Perez again.
Whitson and Dick Williams are out of the game.
Before Dick got thrown out, he made a list. He said, okay, when I get thrown out, Jack Kroll, you're going to be the manager now, and Greg Booker, you're going to be the one that hits Pasquale Perez.
So Greg Booker comes into the game. Pasquale Perez comes up again in the 5th inning and gets thrown out again.
Here we go again. Booker's first pitch went zipping past the ear of Pasquale Perez. He has been thrown out of the ball game now.
But he hasn't gotten hit yet.
And the Padres appeared to have only one more chance to gain revenge.
He comes up again in the 8th inning. We finally got him.
That's when all heck broke loose.
Here come the Braves. They are going after Lefferts. For the 4th straight time, Perez coming to the plate, and we've got one going now.
Bob Horner, who was the Atlanta Braves' 3rd baseman, is on a disabled list in the press box with a cast on his arm. He's down dressed in the Atlanta Braves dugout.
Summers charging after Perez. Bob Horner has come out. We've got some fans involved now. Oh, my. Oh, my.
Some fan came down, and then the next thing you know, we go back out there to hit.
And Greg Nettles knew that this day was far from over.
He says, hey, KB, he goes, get ready. I go, what do you mean? He goes, I hit Donnie Moore during one of the fights. He's going to get me.
And that pitch hits Greg Nettles, and he's going after Donnie Moore. Here we go again.
Then there's another fight that breaks out, and, you know, hey, you're just out there protecting your teammates.
Welcome back to Guerrilla Baseball from Atlanta.
My, oh, my, oh, my. I have never seen a ball game where so many separate incidents have occurred.
Bavacqua went into the stands.
We've got more trouble breaking out. The Padres and some fans are getting into it.
They finished the game with everybody in the clubhouse, nobody on the benches.
When all was said and done, this would go down as one of the most memorable brawls in baseball history.
It was quite a fight. We still talk about it. Players on the Braves that I run into, my teammates.
It was a galvanizing moment for men who all year had battled each other.
There may have been a method to Dick Williams' madness that day, because something very unique happened in relationship to our team.
The unified Padres were never threatened again, coasting to their first ever division title.
The throw to first, and the Padres have the ball game.
For us to win was just incredible.
You start spring training with these hopes and these dreams, and now all of a sudden, there you are on that day when you clinch, and it's become a reality.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Wrigley Field in Chicago. The first game of the National League Championship Series, the San Diego Padres and the Chicago Cubs.
For the first time in franchise history, the Padres were playing postseason baseball. But in the first 2 games, the Cubs smoked them by a combined score of 17-2. And that left them wondering.
We got beat so bad that we didn't know if we had a chance to win or not. I mean, it was tough.
The Cubs try for a sweep at the series. It'll move to Jack Murphy Stadium in San Diego, California.
Baseball purists would have told you that San Diego Padres pretty much were done.
On the flight back, it was real quiet. A lot of guys are looking in the back of the seats, you know, travel destinations, like where are we going to go when, you know, on vacation, because this doesn't look good.
We came home. Nobody's at the airport. We come out to get our cars out here at Jack Murphy Stadium, and what happens, about 3,000 to 4,000 people show up, and we can't believe it.
It kind of got us going. It kind of said, wait a minute, these people believe in us.
To see all those fans screaming, hollering, yelling for us, giving us a support, I couldn't be more upbeat.
And when Templeton fed off that energy before Game 3, it got everyone fired up.
Playing shortstop, number 1, Gary Templeton.
I knew that we needed something to get us uplifted and going. So when they announced me, I ran out there and I started screaming at the fans, let's go, screaming at the players, come on, let's go, get excited, man, come on, these fans are getting us up.
When Templeton came out and he waved his hat, I believe that it was then that the Padres and the Padres fans became united.
For him to go out there, it just sent a sense of confidence throughout the club. Hey, yeah, we can do this, and that's what leadership does, and he provided it there.
Well, Gary provided more than leadership. He also gave the team a lead. It happened in the 5th inning when the Padres were down 1-0, 2 on and 1 out. Kevin McReynolds then broke the game open with a 3-run blast, and the Padres were still alive in their first LCS.
That will get it. The Padres get on the board in the championship series.
To win that first game back in San Diego, all of a sudden it was like, man, we've got new life.
A happy dugout right there. Dick Williams has got another reprieve.
Now we go to the next game, Game 4. It's the only game that we have.
And Garvey was the star of this show. With 48 postseason games to his credit, more than any other member of the team, Steve knew how to perform on the October stage.
Garvey doing everything that he can possibly do tonight to keep his team ahead.
And after the Cubs battled back to tie the game, Garvey was there in the 9th, hoping to keep the Padres season alive.
I stood on the on-deck circle looking at Tony. I said, Tony, just get on.
Gwynn did his part, and that set the stage for Mr. Clean to close things out in immaculate fashion.
The Padres cannot ask for anything more. They've got their leading hitter, Steve Garvey, coming to the plate, a man that can hit in the clutch.
And I figured, well, I'll load up and look for the fastball. Got a pitch out over the plate.
Deep right field, way back, Cutter going back to the wall. It's gone! Home run Garvey, and there will be tomorrow.
That's Steve Garvey's night. Steve Garvey got every big hit a man could possibly get in one game.
Oh, Doctor, you can hang a star on that, baby.
I lifted up my arm and fist to signal to the fans that they were number 1, and we were on our way to Game 5.
The fact that the Padres had overcome a 2-game deficit lifted the team's confidence prior to Game 5.
The mood in the clubhouse was that we were going to win the game. We didn't have no doubt about it.
But the Cubs tested San Diego's resolve when they took an early lead.
Cubs jump ahead 3-0 with Sutcliffe on the mound, and we think maybe our magic's over, but we started coming back again.
And with the tying run on second in the 7th, Tim Flannery got the chance to turn Jack Murphy Stadium on its ear.
I come off the bench in the 7th inning with down a run.
Now here's Tim Flannery. He's going to come on and pinch hit.
I hit a first pitch ground ball to Leon Durham.
Ground ball hit the dirt right through his legs. Here comes Martinez. We're tied at 3.
The tying run scores, and the place erupts. There was actual physical pressure in my ears from the noise.
The Padres fed off Durham's gift to take a 6-3 lead and then held the Cubs scoreless in the 8th, setting the stage for some magic at the Murph.
Now there's 3 outs to go, and we realize we get 3 outs, we're going to go to the World Series.
Off the hands, Nettles will go the short way, and then there were none. The Padres have won it all.
It was an electric afternoon for us, and to end up winning that game and going on to the World Series is tremendous.
No National League team had ever been 0-2 to come back and win. And by God, they won. Whether they're better than the Cubs, nobody cares. They won the playoff.
Those moments are so rare. And as a Padre, we knew how special this was, and it was our first.
The story I love to tell is the Chicago Cubs 3 times had their champagne on ice in their clubhouse. And 3 times they had to wheel it back out before the game was over with. And Doc Matai, our traveling secretary, ended up buying their champagne for half price. So we drank the Cubs champagne. It tasted really good.
Congratulations, Joan and Ballard and Dick Williams and all the Padres. Now go get them in the World Series.
It was the 5th game of the World Series. We're down 3-1. Kirk Gibson comes up.
First base is open, 2 men on. They have, I think, a 1-run lead.
Dick yells at me, and he gives me the 4 to walk Kirk Gibson.
And they will walk Gibson, I believe.
Terry Kennedy, my catcher, gave me 4, and I looked over in the dugout, and Dick was holding up 4 fingers.
Very simple strategy. 4 balls, put them on.
And I shook my head, no, I don't want to walk him.
And I said, hey, I didn't make this up. You know, this isn't my idea. It's his idea.
We're looking over here at you. I've already given him 4 balls.
So I do it again, and Goose says no. So I went to the mound. I said, what are you talking about? He says, he wants you to walk him.
He don't want to walk you.
He says, well, I got good history against this guy. He says, I can get him. So I turn to the dugout. By this time, Dick's coming out.
And now, Dick Williams is going to go out there.
And he comes out, and he goes, what? You don't want to walk him?
Huh? I've had good success.
He's, Dick, I get this guy out all the time.
Well, they're making a decision here, and Williams is in charge.
I'm the manager, I'm in charge, so this is my fault, not Goose's.
You mean you're talking about striking him out? Yeah.
I said, go ahead and pitch to him.
All right, let's go. 1 man out.
He had the adrenaline flowing. I thought he should have put him on. I'm the manager. That's the way it should have been.
Well, if he changes his mind, I can't believe it.
So Dick gets back in the dugout and turns around, and I throw the pitch, and he hits it into the upper deck.
The magical ride of the '84 Padres had come to an end, but the memories were so vivid they still came to life a quarter-century later when 2 beloved Padres were immortalized with baseball's elite.
In December, I get the call from Goose. My wife answers the phone, and he says, Norma?
He says, Dick there. She says, just a moment. I said, this is the guy that
should have walked Gibson.
And she just burst out laughing.
She says, Goose, how are you? She said, I just want to call and congratulate your husband. I had a chance to do that in January when he got elected. San Diego, I had 2 fellows there go to the Hall of Fame. As you know, Tony Gwynn and my colleague, Goose Gossage. We went in together. We've been good friends, even with that incident. We have fun with it now.
You know, Dick, my only regret about that World Series is I should have listened to you and I should have walked Kirk Gibson, damn it. I can't tell you how honored and happy I am to be entering the Hall of Fame with Dick.
I think they both deserve it. They should be in, and I'm glad they went in together because they were both instrumental in us winning in '84.
As for the 3rd Hall of Famer from that '84 team, well, he didn't stray too far from the nest.
You know, it's not too often that you see a ball player stick with one organization throughout their entire career. And he had the opportunity to do it in his hometown, which was really cool.
I have always felt like this was the right place for me.
There's no question that Tony is Mr. Padre. He is San Diego.
After 20 seasons with the Padres, Tony's now the head coach of his alma mater, San Diego State University.
I love the college game, and right now, going into my 8th year at San Diego State, I'm loving every minute of it, and hopefully I can do it for a long time. I love the pro game, too. I have a son who's playing big league baseball.
And this apple did not fall far from the tree, for it was in May of 2009 that Tony and Tony Jr. had a special father and son reunion.
So when my wife called me and told me that, you know, your son had been traded, and I said, to who? And she said, the Padres. I said, the Padres? You gotta be kidding. I can't even repeat it.
Ladies and gentlemen, who wrote this script? Anthony Gwynn Jr. to a standing ovation.
When I watch him play now, I never would have thought that this would happen. In this game, sometimes things happen for a reason.
That's a lesson Dave Dravecki also took to heart soon after he lost his pitching arm to cancer, a tale of triumph to this day.
He's an amazing man. He's still out speaking. He's out lifting people up.
I've had the unique privilege over the last 18 years of being able to tell my story in hopes to motivate and inspire people.
Dave Dravecky, lost his arm. I mean, there's been some tragedy off of that team. But, we get older. Time moves on. That's part of life.
Triumph and tragedy does mark the '84 Padres, for in '91, Alan Wiggins succumbed to complications from AIDS, the result of his chronic drug use.
I was sitting in my office on this particular day, and the phone rang, and Tony Antanasio, the agent for Alan Wiggins, called me, and he said, Jack, he said, Alan's in the hospital, and he'd like for you to come see him. So I went over to the hospital, and we talked, and he said, Jack, I'm going to die. I'm going to die within a couple days. And he said, I want you, when you're out on a speaking tour, going to schools, talking to young players, please tell them the Alan Wiggins story. Tell them how Alan Wiggins lost his life. Tell them, please don't do drugs. So every time I go out on a speaking tour, I make sure that I relay Alan's message.
That was really sad because I really thought Alan had a lot to give, but, it's real tough when you're out there fighting demons and you're not getting any help. And I just felt that if somebody would have reached out to him or me or any of our teammates, he might still be with us.
But I try not to think of that Alan. I try to think of the Alan that I played with, that I came up with. Yeah, he can really play some baseball.
With Wiggins, you can look back and you can say, well, he's self-destructing him. With Eric Shaw, you really didn't think that. I mean, he really hit things good. And evidently, he was hiding a drug problem also.
3 years after Wiggins passed away, Eric Shaw died of a drug overdose while in a rehab center just outside San Diego.
I just remember when he died, I was shocked. I was stunned because he always took care of himself, worked out a lot, in tremendous shape.
Eric would be the last guy that you would figure would have a drug problem. I mean, he was this right-wing, drugs are wrong. That part was absolutely stunning, that he developed a drug problem.
I really didn't believe it until the next day it came out in the paper. Former Padre Eric Shaw passed away.
I just think he had things going on in his life that we didn't know about, and somewhere along the way he lost control.
That's the one area that really breaks my heart. There was so much we didn't know, and then when it all came out, we just wanted to be there for him, and I think at that point he was ashamed to really let us, his buddies, know that he had these demons that he was dealing with.
We really didn't know what kind of demons he had, and he didn't talk about it, but it was a sad, sad ending that we lost him and Alan Wiggins, part of the championship team, but that's the cycle of life.
It's 2009 now. I'm 49 years old, and you can tell from the gray hair on my head. When I think back to '84, there's no negatives. There are no negatives. There's just a lot of positives, a lot of quality guys in that clubhouse.
It brings back a special time in your life, and every guy on that team would tell you the same thing. The one thing that made us a winning team that year was the camaraderie amongst the players.
It was an incredible season. It was a journey to the highs of this game.
The roar of the crowd as Garvey's ball goes over the wall will stick with me for the rest of my life.
It was disappointing to lose to the Detroit Tigers, and I should have walked Gibson, but getting there and turning on a city for the first time was an incredible feeling.
We were the first, and even though we didn't win it, I still take a whole lot of pride in being on that first team to get there.
The Padres of '84 really enjoyed putting San Diego on the baseball map.
When I think about the things that happened during that time and after that time, there was triumph that was born of tragedy, and I think all of us that were part of that club would agree.
There are great moments and sad moments. It's never perfect. It never works the way you want it to work. I guess the 1984 team is a microcosm of what life is really all about.
Hey, Terry, nice to see you. How you been, huh?
Hey, it still fits, same size.
See, his is a little tight. See,
It's always because of the guns.
He started lifting.
TK. Little help, please.
We've changed, we've got gray hair, we've gained some weight, but when you look in the eyes, everything's the same.
Here, let's go get a bat right now.
Yeah, let's see what you can do about that, huh?
The reunion offered a rare chance for these former teammates to once again enjoy each other's company. Not everyone could make it. Among them, Hall of Famers Goose Gossage, manager Dick Williams, and Tony Gwynn, who was coaching at San Diego State.
A lot of quality guys in that clubhouse, and I wished I could have been here at the reunions because you very rarely get the chance to tell those guys thank you.
But while Tony couldn't say it at the reunion, he did honor his teammates at the Hall of Fame in 2007.
1984, I was the fortunate one because my locker was right in the middle of Garv, of Terry Kennedy, Tim Flannery, Bruce Bochy, and Greg Nettles. And they welcomed me in. Come on, kid, have a seat.
Gwynn, who spent 20 years in a Padres uniform, embodies the triumphant spirit of that 1984 team. But there is also another side to this story. For two other members of the team were conspicuous by their office.
When I took over in '81, Ray Kroc said to me, "What was your goal?" I said, "My goal is to get an average to above average player at every position."
And so McKeon began to clean house and solve this puzzle from scratch. His roster moves earned him a reputation for shrewdness and a classic baseball nickname.
Trader Jack.
Trader Jack. Trader Jack did great things, and he made, I thought, the initial big move in that deal with St. Louis, and it just coalesced. It came together.
Part of the deal was obtaining Cardinals catcher Terry Kennedy, who would become the team's anchor in 1981. He also dealt Gold Glove shortstop Ozzie Smith to St. Louis in search of more offense.
Gary Templeton really had a big impact on the '84 team. You got to remember that he replaced one of the most lovable ball players in San Diego history, Ozzie Smith. And people still will talk about Smith before they talk about Tempe, and yet Tempe was equally as good with a better bat.
In addition to his myriad deals, Trader Jack also drafted wisely, bringing names like Gwynn, Wiggins, and Kevin McReynolds into the system. But what really helped this team build upon its two previous 500 seasons was Kroc's willingness to pay for free agents, one already a Southern California hero.
I had been in LA for 15 years. I never anticipated being anywhere else, and I got an offer I could refuse, and all of a sudden I'm on the market. And I remember meeting with Ray Kroc in his office, gorgeous home up in the cliff, looking up and down the coast. And he said, "Steve," he said, "I think you can make a difference here."
Little by little, we started to put the pieces together, and in the fall of '83, I talked to the organization about the possibility of signing Goose Gossage. I thought he could help us win the pennant, and Ray said, "Go do it."
But tragically, Kroc would never get to see this team in action, for in January of 1984, he died of heart disease. The team dedicated the season to their former owner, what would become the most memorable season in San Diego Padres history.
I feel it's just one of those things where you don't have to say much. It's kind of lead by example and just go out and do your job like a professional, and the kids are going to follow.
When we looked at our ball club in '83, we needed that closer. And it looked like he was going to sign with us. And then all of a sudden, you know, we started talking about economics and didn't think we could afford it. And Ray Kroc was in the hospital. Ballard Smith was the president of the club. And Ballard said, "Let's go over and see Ray." So we went over to see Ray. And Ray said, "How are we coming along with Gossage?" And I remember Ballard Smith saying, "Well, Ray, I don't know whether we can afford it." And he said, "What do you think, Jack?" I said, "If we get him, we win the pennant." And Ray says, "Ballard, sign him." And basically, that's how we got Goose Gossage.
I came over here to help win a pennant. I'm not going to win it all by myself. It's going to take 25 guys over 162 games.
You know, in spring training, he talked about winning championships. I don't know for the other young guys, but for me, it was kind of hard to comprehend.
The 1984 Padre Ball Club is a microcosm of what life is really all about.
Sure, you know, everybody had different beliefs and philosophies.
We had members of the John Birch Society.
Drugs.
Punches being thrown.
The players would get on each other.
There'd be arguments in the clubhouse every day.
That's the way it was. But we were a team that knew that we wanted to win.
Every team has its own fabric to it. Every team has its own destiny to play out. That team, through its clawing and fighting and arguing, they were able to put it all aside and win a pennant, which was the first here in San Diego.
The one common thread among all of us was a respect for the fans. We taught them what a winner looks like, how it acts. 25 years later, we feel the same.
Sentiment shared by the San Diego fans who welcomed back members of the '84 team for a special reunion at Petco Park. Absence. Tragic figures whose talent was trumped by torment. Like starting pitcher Eric Shao.
Eric Shao was a dear friend, one of my closest friends, and he brought struggles from his past into a new life as a Christian.
Also missing was Alan Wiggins, a speed demon on the field, haunted by demons off it.
Alan Wiggins was one of those accidents that you see happening, and there just did not seem to be any way to recover him.
And for some Padres, triumph and tragedy has played an equal role in their fate.
I think triumph is really born out of tragedy. And that is what I take away from 1984 and the good, the bad, and the ugly that came with that. This is way too cool.
The good was certainly their connection with the fans.
What position do you like?
First base and pitcher.
Ah, first base. All right.
You know, for us old guys, it's fun when people come out and they, even if they don't remember, they want an autograph.
That was the greatest. You know, such a good group, and all the reminiscings we did today was great. Well, thank you.
You gave us a good time back then.
Yes, we did.
You see, although Padres fans were always loyal, they were not always treated to winning baseball. The team had struggled since its birth in 1969, and owner Ray Kroc, the visionary behind McDonald's, decided to change the menu by putting his own Big Mac into the front.